Hi everyone, if you just joined, we'll be getting started shortly, just waiting for everybody to arrive. Brilliant, so it's 7:30 and we'll make a start. Well, welcome everybody to the first race of the 2023 jog season, the Raymarine Lonely Tower race. Thank you very much to Raymarine for sponsoring the race. I think if there's one word to summarise Saturday, it's going to be windy, to say the least. So what we'll do is we'll start by having a look at the weather, the synoptic scale, and then we'll have a look at the course, just talk briefly about some of the course race admin, and then I'm going to hand over to Will, who's going to take us through the tactics for Saturday, and then we're going to do the same for Sunday as well. So if we look at this synoptic chart, the time is set to 7 o'clock, just gone. We can see this low pressure system sitting over Northern England and Scotland, and that's giving us westerly and southwesterly winds. I'm sat on my boat at the moment down in Hamble, and it's definitely quite windy now. Boat's rolling about and I can hear the wind in the rigging. If we run the time forward, during the night, the low pressure is going to head east, and there's a new low pressure and frontal system approaching from the southwest. Running the time on a bit forward through Saturday, the wind should lighten in the middle of the afternoon towards the evening, and the wind should back as well. Ultimately, early evening, we're going to be in southerly, southeasterly winds, and then later on, this frontal system is going to pass over. It looks to be passing directly over the race course about 3 in the morning on Sunday, and then Sunday morning that low pressure has passed and we're looking at northerly winds across the course. If we look at the race course itself, apologies for this, minor internet issues. So the first start is as per the sailing instructions at 9:30, and then the last starts at 10:15, starting at the usual jog start line. For those who are new to it, that's just off the Gurnard Ledge Buoy, leaving Snowdon to starboard, and then leading No Man's Land Fort to starboard as well, off to Nab Tower, and then heading back up to Winner, through the forts again, and then leaving Prince Consort to starboard and Snowdon to port and back through the finish line. Total distance is about 35 miles. Couple of key features I'm sure we'll talk about. Obviously, you've got Ryde Middlebank here and the deep water channel in the middle. On the outbound leg on Saturday, the tide will be with us, so best to stem deep water. And then on the way back, the tide will probably be with you. Will can give us a bit more detail in that. So again, probably staying in the deep water will be the plan, but it just depends on what time you get around the race course. And I'll just hand over to Will now, who can give us a bit more detail.
Thank you. So I think the first thing I focus in on is the start. So having talked to the race officer, nothing is confirmed, but there are good odds he will use the extended line. So that means that the line is the Cardinal to the shore as a transit, and it runs 345 away from the shore. So with that in mind, if they're running the extended line, I'd be looking down course at both Snowdon and Norris Point and trying to get something lined up so you don't have to put a jibe in down the leg. If it's the short line, I'd be looking at starting somewhere near the Cardinal and getting a early jibe out into the channel, because I think with the west/southwest we're going to do the race in, off Cowes will be quite gusty and there'll be big light patches. So I'd be looking at sort of keeping out the wind shadow. I think as you go down the course round the corner off Norris is always very gusty. So if you have enough crew and I know it's not true for all the shorthanders, but having someone looking backwards and calling the gusts sort of round hill be quite valuable. I'm expecting this first leg all the way to the forts, probably a VMG run or one jibe VMG run, so I'm not expecting much choice. I think straight south of, I think pretty much straight line, unless it's a lot further north of west than the forecasts are currently saying. I think the other thing on this leg is to start, and this sort of be the theme through the whole race. Obviously, it's the first race of the season for a lot of people. I know some hardy people are out doing Frostbite and Spring Series, but for a lot of people, I know it's the first race. I think thinking a long way ahead. So we've talked about even at this point, start thinking about getting the boat and sort of jibs and stuff set in terms of having the correct jib for the beat back, because if you look at the next two legs from the Forts to Nab and Nab North, they are both going to be quite tight. So I think from a sort of perspective, you probably don't want people on the foredeck changing jibs or things like that on those legs if you can avoid it. So I think Nab, sort of Forts to Nab, probably a kite reach. That could be the interesting leg. I'll put it that way. And I think again, straight line, just remembering your tidal offset. If we're going at the speeds, I think there won't be that much tide at this point, but there'll be a little bit, which will pull you a little bit higher. So that might be worth 5-10 degrees when you're making your sail selection at the Forts. Nab North, I think that's going to be fetch / beam reach. I think it's going to be, again, I think it's going to be mainly a straight line. And I don't think tactically there's going to be much. It's all, so all those first three legs are all going to be about boat speed and boat handling, keeping the boat pointing the way you want it to go and keep getting as much speed out of it as you can. As Will said, there's quite a bit of wind forecast. So trying to just deal with that, get the boat set and try and remember all those settings that we've not used in a good few months. From winner at the top, I think you've got to obviously go between the Forts, but in my head, it's pretty much one beat the whole way back. I think there's going to be two sort of competing demands as you go up the beat. The tide should turn with about 11:45-12:00-ish. So you need to keep it. So probably keep an eye on your cog and SOG versus boat speed and heading, and try and keep a good idea on where the tide's turned, because there's good odds, sort of certainly in the early parts of this beat, that the tide will have turned on the mainland shore and not turned in the channel. So work your way out, keep an eye on the tide, and as it goes, as you sort of get along the course, the tide should build across the whole thing. Means probably by the second half, there'll be quite a bit of wind over tide. So thinking about sail setups for chop and the classic Solent chop as we go up the mainland shore, as we go up the Eastern Solent back to the finish. And I think the last thing to point out is, again, with the wind direction, expect big gusts and shifts as you're coming into Cowes. Sort of like at the end of a classic Cowes Week day, it's always gusty and shifty coming around that point, trying to just keep the boat going. Again, if you've got someone free cooling gusts, that'd be really valuable up that leg. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions. You can type them in the chat if you want to ask anything, or Will, I don't know if you've got any questions or anything you want to add to that.
I'll just we can just have a quick look at the wind maps, probably show you the gust maps actually, for Saturday, because I think this will give a good impression of what's going on. So we zoom right in on the Solent. So obviously respecting the fact that just because you zoom in on something doesn't make the information you're looking at any more accurate than being zoomed out. We're seeing during the morning, just sort of in that point in the Eastern Solent there, seeing a little above 25 knots, gusting 30. The top gust I've seen is 35, possibly a little bit more just off Nab Tower, just because it's a little bit more exposed. If we just look at the forecast tables, they can give us a nice summary of where the different forecasts are sort of aligned. So on Saturday, general consensus is going to be westerly for the first part of the day, and then backing southwesterly after 1 or 2 o'clock. Average sort of speed is sort of 19 to 24. The Arome forecast, which I was looking at, there's a validation tool in PredictWind, was showing that the Arome forecast has generally been more accurate when it comes to wind speed and direction recently. It's showing slightly higher winds there. But I think the key thing, rather than from my perspective, the key thing isn't so much the mean wind speed as that gust speed, which will make the leg interesting. A couple of housekeeping items just to address. Firstly, fairly obvious one, but the class bandings have changed from last year for inshore racing. So my boat's moved from class 2 to class 3. Double check you've got the correct flag on board and you can fly it. On communications for the day, the channel is M1 or 37A, and before the start, please make sure you pass through the identity gate, which is between the jog start box and the starting buoy, and everybody needs to be wearing life jackets and a harness when going through that gate. Moving on to the Sunday, the Great Escape.
One last thing on the notes is I think there's a few boats still marked as red in the entry list, which means they've not completed everything on their entry online. So if you can double check your entries, or there was when I looked 6 hours ago, people might have completed by then.
Yeah, thanks, Will. There's still a few people showing red on the who's entered page. So if you do have any outstanding bits, please just log into the jog portal and complete those. Looking ahead to the Sunday, so we looked at the synoptic weather at the beginning of the brief. On Sunday, if we look at the gust map, so this is early Sunday morning, we've got this low pressure basically passing right over the race course, which looks to be bringing us northerly winds during the day, and generally the winds are getting a bit lighter just as that low pressure moves away. There's one thing I would say is that obviously weather forecasting's as much art as science, and if this low pressure perhaps moves at a different speed or in a slightly different direction, then the wind could be substantially different to what the current forecast is saying. So obviously on Sunday morning you just want to revalidate your weather forecast, and I'd actually say the same thing applies for Saturday morning as well, if the pressure systems move slightly differently. Looking at the course for the day, apologies for the lines, I'll explain it and hopefully it'll be a bit clearer. So the start line as per Saturday, and then heading down to Saltmead, which is off Gurnard over here, and then back up towards the start line, leaving Snowdon to starboard, back down to the fort, so a bit of a repeat of the main leg of Saturday, and then down to the Bembridge Ledge Buoy, back through the forts and back through the finish, leaving Prince Consort to starboard and Snowdon to port. Yeah, really important to get that right, because I've seen several people, including myself, nearly come a cropper there. So just pay attention to that, even if there's lots of wind to get you around. Over to you, Will.
Cool, thank you. So I think the first thing, and it's going to sort of caveat pretty much everything I'm about to say, is again, as Will said, the forecast's got a lot of flux in it. And the second thing is, with it having swung the one pretty much 270 from 270 all the way through the south to the north overnight and blowing off the land on the north, I'm expecting it to be very fluky and very twitchy from a direction point of view through the whole race on Sunday. I think we're going to see some pretty big shifts through the whole race, and certainly after leg one, I think keeping an eye on the shifts and making sure you're on top of the trim and the adjustments is going to be the critical thing, rather than any sort of tidal or sort of side of course strategy. First leg is downwind, probably a kite reach if it's far enough north. I've seen one or two forecasts said northeast, in which case it'd be a VMG run, but it's against the tide down. My view is always for Saltmead, it's very unlikely to pay going all the way mainland shore and back across. So it'll be along the island shore. Key, I think, navigationally to highlight is Gurnard Ledge. There is an inner court, there is an inner channel. It's not for the faint-hearted. I know lots of people have been down it. I've been down it in the past, but also if you are, the one thing I will say is it's entirely your choice and your responsibility whether you go in there. but the worst thing you can do is half go in there. If you're going to go for it, you've got to go for it. Other than that, yeah, just keep out of the tide as much as you can, and then get down to Saltmead, and then from there it's probably a beat back up with the tide, so out into the channel, up round. Probably most of the beat will be on port with the northerly. It depends again exactly where it is. Then the legs from Cowes to the fort, and back again with the tide. Tides with on Sunday until, sorry, just checking my notes, 1:30. So I think most of the boats will be most of the way to Bembridge before the tide starts to turn. Again, I don't think there's that much. I think with the forecast wind direction, it's going to be pretty straight lines through most of these. But so I think for the most of this, it's pretty much straight lines. Keep your trim, and then as I say, I think it's going to be really fluky coming off the northern shore. So just keeping an eye on the trim, the setup, and watching for gusts and big shifts coming down across the Solent. Leg back might be a beat, probably going to be a one tack fetch, but which means that again, I don't think there's much worth options in terms of choice of side. I think most of sort of Cowes to Bembridge and back again will be straight lines, other than the beat back from Bembridge to the forts. Tidally, that's going to be an interesting one, but I think at this far out with this forecast, it's too hard for me to predict which way the tide's going to be going when we get sort of round Bembridge and start beating back. So keep an eye on the tide, and pick and just sort of watch for it changing at that point. But other than that, I don't have much else to add on that race. Will, anything else you want to bring up?
No, that's great. Thanks, Will. So just housekeeping again, you do need to go through the identity gate as per the sailing instructions on Sunday, even if you did it on Saturday. So please make sure you do that. I suppose the final thing, just thanks very much for everyone for taking part in this race. It's really appreciated as well, having the Sunfast Cup being part of the Nab Tower Lonely race as well. And then on Saturday night, the watering holes on the mainland side will be the Royal Southern Yacht Club in Hamble, and then Island Sailing Club on the Isle of Wight for those berthing in Cowes. And I look forward to seeing everybody out tomorrow morning. If you've got any questions, please stick them in the chat. Will and I will do our best to answer them. But other than that, please go and enjoy your evening, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Will, how many crew have you got on board for tomorrow?
We'll see. It's full crew 8 or 9, depending on things. I think some people look at the forecast and going, you two-handing?
Yeah.
Oh,
hi, Nigel. How can we help? You should be able to speak. I think you just need to unmute yourself. Hi, Nigel. If you can hear me, you just need to unmute yourself, and I'm very happy to take the question.
does the unmute have to come from you, Will?
It's
the host.
I'm not able to do it. I can only give permission to talk. I can't actually unmute someone. Nigel's lowered his hand. So.
Oh, it doesn't look like there's many questions, so we'll leave it there and see you on the racecourse tomorrow.
Cheers, Will. Thanks very much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Bye.